Margaret Hilda Thatcher, Baroness Thatcher, LG, PC, FRS, FRIC was a British stateswoman who was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1979 to 1990 and the leader of the Conservative Party from 1975 to 1990. She was the longest-serving British Prime Minister of the 20th century, and the first woman to have held the office. A Soviet journalist dubbed her the Iron Lady, a nickname that became associated with her uncompromising politics and leadership style. As Prime Minister, she implemented policies that have come to be known as Thatcherism. Originally a research chemist before becoming a barrister, Thatcher was elected Member of Parliament for Finchley in 1959. Edward Heath appointed her Secretary of State for Education and Science in his 1970 government. In 1975, Thatcher defeated Heath in the Conservative Party leadership election to become leader of the opposition and became the first woman to lead a major political party in the United Kingdom. She became Prime Minister after winning the 1979 general election. On moving into 10 Downing Street, Thatcher introduced a series of political and economic initiatives intended to reverse high unemployment and Britain's struggles in the wake of the winter of discontent and an ongoing recession. Her political philosophy and economic policies emphasized deregulation, flexible labor markets, the privatization of state-owned companies, and reducing the power and influence of trade unions. Thatcher's popularity during her first years in office waned amid recession and high unemployment, until victory in the 1982 Falklands War and the recovering economy brought a resurgence of support, resulting in her re-election in 1983. Thatcher was re-elected for a third term in 1987. During this period her support for a community charge was widely unpopular, and her views on the European community were not shared by others in her cabinet. She resigned as Prime Minister and party leader in November 1990, after Michael Heseltine launched a challenge to her leadership. After retiring from the Commons in 1992, she was given a life peerage as Baroness Thatcher of Kesteven in the county of Lincolnshire, which entitled her to sit in the House of Lords. After a series of small strokes in 2002, she was advised to withdraw from public speaking. Despite this, she managed to pre-record a eulogy to Ronald Reagan prior to his death, which was broadcast at his funeral in 2004. In 2013, she died of another stroke in London at the age of 87. Early life and education. Thatcher was born Margaret Hilda Roberts on 13 October 1925 in Grantham, Lincolnshire. Her father was Alfred Roberts, originally from Northamptonshire, and her mother was Beatrice Ethel from Lincolnshire. She spent her childhood in Grantham, where her father owned 2 grocery shops. She and her older sister Muriel were raised in the flat above the larger of the 2, on North Parade. Her father was active in local politics and the Methodist Church, serving as an alderman and a local preacher, and brought up his daughter as a strict Wesleyan Methodist attending the Finken Street Methodist Church. He came from a liberal family but stood, as was then customary in local government, as an independent. He was mayor of Grantham in 1945-46 and lost his position as alderman in 1952 after the Labour Party won its first majority on Grantham Council in 1950. Margaret Roberts attended Hunting Tower Road Primary School and won a scholarship to Kesteven and Grantham Girls' School. Her school reports showed hard work and continual improvement. Her extracurricular activities included the piano, field hockey, poetry recitals, swimming and walking. She was head girl in 1942-43. In her upper 6th year she applied for a scholarship to study chemistry at Somerville College, Oxford, but she was initially rejected and was offered a place only after another candidate withdrew. Roberts arrived at Oxford in 1943 and graduated in 1947 with second-class honours in the four-year Chemistry Bachelor of Science degree, specialising in X-ray crystallography under the supervision of Dorothy Hodgkin. Her dissertation was on the structure of the antibiotic gramicidin. Even while working on chemistry, she was already thinking towards law and politics. She was reportedly more proud of becoming the first Prime Minister with a science degree than the first female Prime Minister. Roberts became president of the Oxford University Conservative Association in 1946. She was influenced at university by political works such as Friedrich Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, which condemned economic intervention by government as a precursor to an authoritarian state. After graduating, Roberts moved to Colchester in Essex to work as a research chemist for BX Plastics. In 1948 she applied for a job at ICI, but was rejected after the personnel department assessed her as headstrong, obstinate and dangerously self-opinionated. Roberts joined the local Conservative Association and attended the party conference at Llandudno in 1948. As a representative of the University Graduate Conservative Association, one of her Oxford friends was also a friend of the chair of the Dartford Conservative Association in Kent, who were looking for candidates. Officials of the association were so impressed by her that they asked her to apply. Even though she was not on the Conservative Party's approved list, she was selected in January 1951, aged 25, and added to the approved list post-ante. At a dinner following her formal adoption as Conservative candidate for Dartford in February 1951, she met Baroness Thatcher, a successful and wealthy divorced businessman, who drove her to her Essex train. In preparation for the election, Roberts moved to Dartford, where she supported herself by working as a research chemist for J. Lyons & Co. in Hammersmith, part of a team developing emulsifiers for ice cream. Early political career. In the 1950 and 1951 general elections, Roberts was the Conservative candidate for the safe Labour seat of Dartford. The local party selected her as its candidate because, though not a dynamic public speaker, Roberts was well prepared and fearless in her answers. Another prospective candidate recalled that, once she opened her mouth, the rest of us began to look rather second-rate. She attracted media attention as the youngest and the only female candidate. She lost on both occasions to Norman Dodds, but reduced the Labour majority by 6,000, and then a further 1,000. During the campaigns, she was supported by her parents and by Baroness Thatcher, whom she married in December 1951. Dennis funded his wife's studies for the bar. She qualified as a barrister in 1953 and specialized in taxation. Later that same year, the twins Carol and Mark were born, delivered prematurely by cesarean section. The marriage led to her being referred to as Mrs. Dennis Thatcher, now considered dated by such official sources as selection minutes, travel itineraries, and society publications such as Queen, even after her election as a Member of Parliament, after which she preferred Mrs. Margaret Thatcher, Member of Parliament. In 1954, Thatcher was defeated when she sought selection to be the Conservative Party candidate for the Orpington by-election of January 1955. She chose not to stand as a candidate in the 1955 general election, in later years stating, "I really just felt the twins were only two. I really felt that it was too soon. I couldn't do that." Quote, Afterwards, Thatcher began looking for a Conservative safe seat and was selected as the candidate for Finchley in April 1958. She was elected as MP for the seat after a hard campaign in the 1959 election, benefiting from her fortunate result in a lottery for backbenchers to propose new legislation. Thatcher's maiden speech was in support of her Private Members Bill Act 1960, requiring local authorities to hold the council meetings in public. In 1961 she went against the Conservative Party's official position by voting for the restoration of birching as a judicial corporal punishment. Thatcher's talent and drive caused her to be mentioned as a future Prime Minister in her early 20s, although she herself was more pessimistic, stating as late as 1970 that there will not be a woman Prime Minister in my lifetime. The male population is too prejudiced. Quote, in October 1961 she was promoted to the front bench as Parliamentary Under-Secretary at the Ministry of Pensions and National Insurance in Harold Macmillan's administration. Thatcher was the youngest woman in history to receive such a post, and among the first MPs elected in 1959 to be promoted. After the Conservatives lost the 1964 election, she became spokesman on housing and land, in which position she advocated her party's policy of allowing tenants to buy the council houses. She moved to the Shadow Treasury team in 1966 and, as Treasury spokesman, opposed Labour's mandatory price and income controls, arguing that they would produce effects contrary to those intended and distort the economy. By 1966, party leaders viewed Thatcher as a potential shadow cabinet member. James Pryor proposed her as a member after the Conservatives' 1966 defeat, but party leader Edward Heath and Chief Whip Willie Whitelaw chose Mervyn Pike as the shadow cabinet's sole woman member. At the Conservative Party conference of 1966, she criticised the high tax policies of the Labour government as being steps not only towards socialism, but towards communism, arguing that lower taxes served as an incentive to hard work. Thatcher was one of the few Conservative MPs to support Leo Abbs's bill to decriminalise male homosexuality. She voted in favour of David Steele's bill to legalise abortion, as well as a ban on hair coursing. She supported the retention of capital punishment and voted against the relaxation of divorce laws. In 1967, the United States Embassy in London chose Thatcher to take part in the International Visit the Leadership Program, a professional exchange program that gave her the opportunity to spend about 6 weeks visiting various U.S. cities and political figures as well as institutions such as the International Monetary Fund. Although she was not yet a shadow cabinet member, the embassy reportedly described her to the State Department as a possible future Prime Minister. The description helped Thatcher meet with many prominent people during a busy itinerary focused on economic issues, including Paul Samuelson, Walter Rostow, Pierre-Paul Schweitzer and Nelson Rockefeller. After Pike's retirement, Heath appointed Thatcher later that year to the shadow cabinet as fuel and power spokesman. Shortly before the 1970 general election, she was promoted to shadow transport spokesman and later to education secretary. 1970–74 The Conservative Party under Edward Heath won the 1970 general election, and Thatcher was subsequently appointed to the cabinet as Secretary of State for Education and Science. During her first months in office she attracted public attention as a result of the administration's attempts to cut spending. She gave priority to academic needs in schools. She imposed public expenditure cuts on the state education system, resulting in the abolition of free milk for school children aged 7 to 11. She held that few children would suffer if schools were charged for milk, but agreed to provide younger children with 1/3 of a pint daily, for nutritional purposes. cabinet papers later revealed that she opposed the policy but had been forced into it by the Treasury. Her decision provoked a storm of protest from Labour and the press, leading to the moniker Margaret Thatcher, Milk Snatcher. She reportedly considered leaving politics in the aftermath and later wrote in her autobiography, "I learned a valuable lesson. I had incurred the maximum of political odium for the minimum of political benefit." Thatcher's term of office was marked by proposals for more local education authorities to close grammar schools and to adopt comprehensive secondary education. Although she was committed to a tiered secondary modern grammar school system of education and was determined to preserve grammar schools. During her tenure as Education Secretary, she turned down only 326 of 3,612 proposals for schools to become comprehensives. The proportion of pupils attending comprehensive schools consequently rose from 32% to 62%. Leader of the opposition, 1975 to 79. The Heath government continued to experience difficulties with oil embargoes and union demands for wage increases in 1973 and lost the February 1974 general election. Labour formed a minority government and went on to win a narrow majority in the October 1974 general election. Heath's leadership of the Conservative Party looked increasingly in doubt. Thatcher was not initially the obvious replacement, but she eventually became the main challenger, promising a fresh start. Her main support came from the Conservative 1922 committee, but Thatcher's time in office gave her the reputation of a pragmatist instead of an ideologue. She defeated Heath on the first ballot and he resigned the leadership. In the second ballot she defeated Whitelaw, Heath's preferred successor. The vote polarized along right-left lines, with the region, experience and education of the MP also having their effects. Thatcher's support was stronger among MPs on the right, those from southern England, and those who had not attended public schools or Oxbridge. Thatcher became party leader and leader of the opposition on the 11th of February 1975. She appointed Whitelaw as her deputy. Heath was never reconciled to Thatcher's leadership. Thatcher began to attend lunches regularly at the Institute of Economic Affairs, a think tank founded by the poultry magnate Anthony Fisher. A disciple of Friedrich Hayek, she had been visiting the IEA and reading its publications since the early 1960s. There she was influenced by the ideas of Ralph Harris and Arthur Selden, and she became the face of the ideological movement opposing the welfare state. Keynesian economics, they believed, was weakening Britain. The Institute's pamphlets proposed less government, lower taxes, and more freedom for business and consumers. The television critic Clive James, writing in The Observer during the voting for the leadership, compared her voice of 1973 to a cat sliding down a blackboard. Thatcher had already begun to work on her presentation on the advice of Gordon Rees, a former television producer. By chance Rees met the actor Laurence Olivier, who arranged lessons with the National Theatre's voice coach. Thatcher succeeded in completely suppressing her Lincolnshire dialect except when under stress, notably after provocation from Dennis Healey in the House of Commons in April 1983, when she accused the Labour frontbench of being FRIC. On the 19th of January 1976, Thatcher made a speech in Kensington Town Hall in which she made a scathing attack on the Soviet Union. The Russians are bent on world dominance, and they're rapidly acquiring the means to become the most powerful imperial nation the world has seen. The men in the Soviet Politburo don't have to worry about the ebb and flow of public opinion. They put guns before butter, while we put just about everything before guns. In response, the Soviet Defense Ministry newspaper Krasnaya Zvezda called her the Iron Lady, a sobriquet she gladly adopted. Margaret Thatcher wanted to prevent the creation of a Scottish Assembly. She told Conservative MPs to vote against the Scotland and Wales Bill in December 1976, which was defeated, and then when new bills were proposed she supported amending the legislation to allow the English to vote in the 1979 referendum on devolution. Britain's economy during the 1970s was so weak that Foreign Minister James Callaghan warned his fellow Labour cabinet members in 1974 of the possibility of a breakdown of democracy, telling them that, if I were a young man, I would emigrate. Quote, in mid-1978, the economy began to improve and opinion polls showed Labour in the lead, with a general election being expected later that year and a Labour win a serious possibility. Now Prime Minister Callaghan surprised many by announcing on the 7th of September that there would be no general election that year and he would wait until 1979 before going to the polls. Thatcher reacted to this by branding the Labour government chickens, and Liberal Party leader David Steel joined in, criticising Labour for running scared. The Labour government then faced fresh public unease about the direction of the country and a damaging series of strikes during the winter of 1978-79, dubbed the Winter of Discontent. The Conservatives attacked the Labour government's unemployment record, using advertising with the slogan, "Labour isn't working." A general election was called after Callaghan's government lost emotion of no confidence in early 1979. The Conservatives won a 44-seat majority in the House of Commons, and Thatcher became the first female British Prime Minister.